Hello and welcome back to my philosophical and musical channel. So YouTube is still alive and I continue my activity. And philosophical vocabulary. The most important question for philosophy and for human being: what can we know? What can I know? And what should I do with this knowledge? And to what extent is our knowledge verifiable? These are very complex and very difficult questions that many outstanding minds are asking for, and this is the subject of Immanuel Kant's main work, the Critique of the Pure Reason. Ancient philosophers, for example, Aristotle, who actually developed a scientific methodology of the process of comprehending the entire world order, also dealt with questions of cognizability. And the key word for today is agnosticism, from the Greek agnostos, unknowable. Is a philosophical concept according to which we cannot know anything about God and in general about any ultimate and absolute foundations of reality. So this ontological question about the first foundation of this reality is unknowable for agnosticism, and sees that unknowable knowledge of which in principle cannot be convincingly confirmed by the evidence of experimental science, of any empirical experience. And the ideas of agnosticism became widespread in the 19th century among English naturalists, of course, and the term agnosticism was proposed in 1869 by Thomas Huxley, in one of his public speeches to indicate this word, the position of a natural scientist in the religious and philosophical discussions of this time, metaphysical discussions. Thomas Henry Huxley, he was born 4th May 1825 and he was dead in June 1895. And he was an English biologist and anthropologist specializing in comparative anatomy. He has become known as Darwin's bulldog for his advocacy of Charles Darwin, Charles Darwin's theory of evolution, and agnosticism was supposed to be some alternative to the generally valid statements of that very pure reason or unprovable propositions from the field of metaphysics, from the field of ontology and philosophy in general. By the way, returning to the same Aristotle, in his Metaphysics, he repeatedly emphasizes that not everything requires proof, and it's some stupid activity to find this proof for everything. It's impossible and it's useless. Otherwise, we will go into an endless regression. And for Aristotle, it's very important to find this border of our knowledge, maybe. And it was precisely as a worldview concept that agnosticism became the object of harsh and not always correct criticism from both religious views, from both religious circles. Atheism is still attributed to it, but it's not so correctly, to tell the truth. And the most consistent materialistic trends identifying agnosticism with subjective idealism, and it's also not so clearly defined. Generally, agnosticism is based on the ideas of David Hume, English empiricist, and of course Immanuel Kant. Sir William Rowan Hamilton. He was born in August 1805 and he was dead 2nd September 1865, so it's 19th century also. And he was an Irish mathematician and astronomer of Ireland. These scientists, William Hamilton, speaking about agnosticism, argues that it is impossible to avoid the inconsistency of knowledge that goes beyond our experience. It's absolutely impossible to avoid these contradictions. And if we recall the existentialists, for example, Søren Kierkegaard comes to mind here, and we can remember his philosophical fragments. In 1844, he wrote, "Let us call this unknown something God. It's nothing more than a name we assign to it. The idea of demonstrating that this unknown something, God, exists could scarcely suggest itself to reason. For if God doesn't exist, it would, of course, be impossible to prove it. And if he does exist, it would be folly to attempt it. For at the very outset, in beginning my proof, I would have presupposed it, not as doubtful, but as certain. A presupposition is never doubtful, for the very reason that is a presupposition. Since otherwise I wouldn't begin readily understanding that the whole would be impossible if he didn't exist. But if when I speak of proving God's existence, I mean that I propose to prove that the unknown which exists is God, then I express myself unfortunately. For in that case I do not prove anything, least of all an existence, but merely develop the content of a conception. And if we remember Huxley, he wrote, therefore, although it was, as I believe, demonstrable that we have no real knowledge of the authorship or of the date of composition of the Gospels, as they have come down to us, and that nothing better than more or less probable guesses can be arrived at on that subject. So, in my opinion, here we can trace the tradition of skepticism. You know, from this Greek tradition, skepticism was rather widespread. It was some of school in ancient Greek. In any case, any scientist strives for reliability, of course, and for this it's necessary to prove our distinct knowledge, of course. On the one hand, to look in great detail at the subject under study, and on the other hand, to take into account and understand the big picture. And this is the key philosophical question, is the aim, is the task of philosophy, in my opinion. And this causes a great difficulty of any cognition and interpretation, of course. Much also depends on the languages and on language and on cultural tradition, and independent thinking is the most difficult task for human being. I think so. Okay, thank you for your attention, and I wish you all good, all the best. Be happy, take care of yourself, and see you later. Thank you.